Hello, everybody. Ron Callis here with another episode of Automation Unplugged. Let me jump over to Facebook as I normally do, just to make sure that I am streaming live. Normally have it pulled up here, so I'm doing this last second. Let me pull this up, and I'm coming to you on a day a little different than our normally scheduled programming. Our guest was available today and not on our normal shooting day of Wednesday. So, but I wanted to bring him to you, his story, his background. It's really fascinating. And so we've made accommodations here. Just checking over on Facebook just to make sure we are live. And it does seem that the technology gods are cooperating. Yes, we are. We are live. Okay. All right. Well, again, Automation Unplugged is brought to you by my day job over at One Firefly. And today is Monday, December 2nd. It is currently just a little bit after 12:30 p.m. And if you are out there, say hi in the comments. Let us know where you're coming to us from. Oh, I see David Weinstein from Lutron. Hey, David, how are you? I see a thumbs up. I see a like. Appreciate that. And let me go ahead and jump right into it. I am going to bring you Michael O. from Tech Superpowers, or I guess more formally known these days as TSP. Which is his MSP business and TSP Smart Spaces. Michael, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. How's it's? I won't rub it in too much, but it's warm and sunny down here in Fort Lauderdale today. How is it up in Boston?
Well, I'm actually not in Boston. I'm in the UK, which is where I'm I live and reside, but the company's based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and they're having a hell of a time with a snowstorm today. So I'm very happy to be here in the UK where it's just above freezing and it's not snowing.
So you just completely threw me for a loop there.
Sorry about that.
No, that's awesome. So remote work is we're a remote workplace here at One Firefly. Our team is located all throughout North America.
Yeah.
And is that the case for you, or are you the one person that is outside of the core office, or do you guys actually have different staff in different locations?
Well, we have staff in different locations. Most of them are based in Boston or the Boston area. We've a guy working out of Virginia as well, and me here in the UK. And I go back to Boston once every 4 to 6 weeks, keep tabs on things, but also meet clients and just continue the good work that we try to do. It's as much as flexible working and teleworking just makes life so easy. There's nothing like sitting down with a customer face to face. And, that's my reality, is a few air miles and certainly a lot of carbon offsetting that I have to do for my conscience. But it is a lot about how technology has enabled, this sort of new world. I mean, when I grew up, my dad didn't have this option. He was a doctor, right? He drove into work every day. We had to live right next to, the hospital. And yeah, it's a different world.
And I want to introduce our audience. Some of them are probably your audience as well, because you have your own podcast. Actually, let's go ahead and plug that. What's the name of your podcast?
Sure. It's called the Grepcast. So GREPCAST. So if you Google that, and it's on iTunes, Spotify, Libsyn, all the usual places. So we're pretty new to this game. I mean, you guys are very experienced. I think we're at about episode 50 something.
Sure.
But it's not necessarily our business as much as just sort of tech adjacent type of topics. We're covering all kinds of interesting stuff around AI and face recognition and how the world's going to go to pot soon. But, things like that.
The whole singularity event.
Yeah, exactly. The Big Bang to the singularity. We cover it all.
That's fun. And so you are officially our guest number 92. So this is show number 92. So
I'm honored.
Yeah, well, no, thank you for being on. And let me just throw, I got a couple of people that have already said hi. I've got Jerry. He's from IC Real Time, which is a manufacturer here in Florida that make
Hmm.
surveillance and security products. And we got Sean. Sean's on here from URC. And
Great.
hey, Sean. And again, I see a few other likes out there. So if you're out there watching, definitely drop a comment below. Let us know where you're coming to us from. That's always fun. Well, Michael, let's go back in time here. Help our audience understand kind of your background, and then we'll bring it to the forward and talk about your two. I don't know. Would you call it two businesses or two divisions of the same business? How do you
Well, it's
structure TSP?
yeah, it's two divisions of the same business, is sort of the smart spaces and our kind of IT or MSP practice, managed services. Uh, the managed service provider, sort of what that stands for. So it all started, and this is a very different story, I'm sure, to most integrators. Uh, because basically I was in college. Well, if you want to go back really far, I grew up in Alabama, but that's a whole nother story. And then as soon as I could, moved out, got into college at MIT. And freshman year at MIT, basically, I started this company, Tech Superpowers. And at the time, I mean, it's 1992, right? I mean, you really have to, there's probably some people listening in that don't remember those years necessarily, but I mean, for me, it's like it's really the beginning of the internet, right? I mean, when I was an undergrad at MIT, I saw Mosaic, which was like the first browser, right? I mean, it's what evolved into Netscape and everything else from there. And the technology at that time, businesses weren't using computers, in the same way that they were today. I mean, they were just starting to sort of figure out how networks worked and how, the internet worked. And so, I mean, me as a kid, I thought to myself, well, I can, people are charging $100 an hour to do this stuff. I mean, I can charge 35 and make a little money on the side. So it started really as a hobby, and just kind of helping people with computers, networking. We had an Apple and Mac focus, which actually at the time, like, nobody really knew much about Apple. I mean, certainly.
This was before Apple was even cool, wasn't it?
Right, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they were a bit player, and it was even before Jobs had come back, and the iMac and all that kind of stuff, where they started this massive trajectory into the company they are now. So, that was just the Mac was what I grew up on, and I started helping people out in the Boston area. And it's fun. I mean, it's fun to go back to that journey, because it started literally with one guy who worked for M. Steinert and Sons, which is the Steinway dealership in Boston, picking up one of my flyers that I had put out as a college kid, and literally every single client from in those 26 years, I can draw all the way back to that one thing. So
That's
it's been
amazing.
a fun ride, and you and I talked about this before. It's like entrepreneurship 101, 26-year degree. I mean, it's having a business is such a great experience. It has its highs and lows like nothing else. So
And it is
that
the same business. Tech Superpowers is the business you started 26 years ago.
it's evolved in a couple different ways. Like, it used to be, an Inc. and then an S corp, and now it's an LLC. So I mean, over the years, it has, definitely evolved. And now I run it with other people. I have an advisory board, and that's actually one of the key lessons I learned. Like, I did things on my own for a good 15, 20 years, and I really screwed up a bunch of stuff because, I just thought I knew what I was doing in business and finance and new business and all that kind of stuff. And as an entrepreneur, it's really easy to pick up on things that are happening, good things, and sort of say, oh, they're going to continue to happen. I mean, one of my biggest mistakes was to open a retail store that kind of like competed with the Apple store. I mean, not necessarily competed with them, but like,
How
I
about
tried to.
this? Tried to compete with the Apple Store?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was more like we were like, oh, okay, there's not an Apple store here, and we were an Apple service provider, and we were selling Macs and all this kind of stuff. and tried to make that work. And of course, it was disastrous results. And it's uh, it got me so close to personal bankruptcy. And these are the things, like, I'm sure entrepreneurs that are listening, other integrators, they've been through the hard times, the good times, and I think there's this sort of like there's nothing like learning it, with your feet in the fire and just having to deal with it as you go along. So it's been a hell of a ride. So
There's nothing harder, and maybe when it turns positive, nothing more rewarding
yeah,
than entrepreneurship. But
yeah,
many around me have heard me say this joke. I say it a bit in jest, but I wouldn't wish entrepreneurship on my worst enemies. It's fantastically challenging, but
absolutely.
rewarding. That's why we
Yeah,
keep doing it.
it is. And I think one of the things that I've done over the years is evolved my personal life to make it work. I mean, in the sense that, like, I've realized what's the balance between work and life that makes both work and life enjoyable, and really tried to make that work both for myself as well as for the culture within the company. Remote working is something that we really try to do, more and more of. I mean, in the sense that, like, we're still a service organization, and that's the struggle, right? Is we're not Google, creating things with our powerful minds on the internet, and you can do it from everywhere. I mean, you're still ultimately integrators like us, and people in the IT field are servicing our customers, and the customers value seeing us show up. And
Now, I just want to go back just a little bit, just because I
sure.
think it's super interesting to me, and I hope some of those watching and listening find this interesting. But you entered MIT in '92,
Yeah.
and what did you study? What was your degree? I mean, I'm assuming it's computer science related or IT related.
Well, it's electrical engineering, which is sort of related, but also aerospace engineering was actually my sort of primary degree, and I got a second degree in electrical engineering in avionics, which is sort of like the electrical version of aerospace. So technically, I'm a rocket scientist, I guess.
You said your brother actually is a rocket scientist at NASA.
That's right. So my brother works at JPL. He went to MIT 4 years before me. He did the full, like, grad school, PhD, and then he now works for NASA at JPL. And he was actually on the Mars rover, the Curiosity that landed. He was on that team, so he was one of the guys jumping around when they landed. It's now a few years ago, so it was pretty
Gosh,
cool.
that is just too cool. That's
Yeah,
amazing. When I
yeah.
was in high school, I did my internship at NASA Langley Research Center in
All
Virginia.
right. Yeah,
So I spent time in the NASA library and hanging out with some of the NASA scientists doing stuff for over a number of years through my youth. So
yeah,
that,
yeah.
but I wasn't quite, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't smart enough to get into MIT. So kudos to you. Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I got
So
lucky.
yeah, no, there's no luck has nothing to do with it. There's a lot of good genes and hard work for sure.
Yeah,
Now,
hard work. Yeah,
you have a belief system here, and I'm just going to read something that I grabbed from your website here,
sure.
and it's I'm going to say how. Let me just read this here. Um, a service focus has really ultimately what you've been driving for the last 26 years, a service
Yeah,
focus for your consumer, and ultimately 20 years in, you added this division focusing on home technology. So you added this residential home technology division. But I
yeah,
just want to go back to just the MSP business and a service focus. Many in our audience maybe don't know what that even means. So what is
right.
an MSP? Who is your typical customer, and what does it mean to have a service focus?
So an MSP, I mean, even that is a more recent evolution of your traditional IT services company, right? I mean, it's sort of like, it used to be the people that just sort of roll over to your business and come out there once a week, once a month, and help you with computer stuff, right? And it's evolved now to be an extremely competitive marketplace, and I would sort of say commoditized, in the sense that there's all different MSPs out there. I mean, in the sense that the tool sets that are available for people to provide IT services are extremely mature. I mean, they've been around for 10, 15, 20 years, all different kinds of systems, ticketing systems, but back-end management and configuration management systems. So it's a highly evolved and mature kind of marketplace where it's actually really, really difficult to gain new customers, because you imagine something in the business world, and that's really where we sit. I mean, our primary target clients are between sort of 25 to 100 users in a business that's like very highly dependent on like professional services. So maybe they're lawyers or architects that are billing themselves out at hundreds of dollars an hour, and any downtime that they have on their systems is very costly, right? And so then it's really worth it for them to engage a company to make sure that their systems are proactively built so that there's no downtime and there's no sort of issues, and if there are issues, they're dealt with very rapidly.
It's easy for them to justify that expense when they just look at the economics of their business.
Absolutely. And it's much more difficult if you're dealing with smaller, like a real estate company, or you're dealing with nonprofits. I mean, there's certainly MSPs that thrive in those environments, but they're very, very specialized. They're like an MSP for real estate companies or an MSP for nonprofits. And you see this sort of market segmentation that's happened in that world, which actually is very parallel to what's happening in the integrator world now, or what will happen, sort of, I believe. So in the MSP world, you go back to when I started the company 15, 20 years ago, people were making tons of money selling Hewlett Packard, Toshiba laptops, Apple, Mac systems. 20 or 30 points was not, a standard, an unusual margin for selling computers. And over the past few years, it's really dwindled. I mean, to the degree that selling hardware is practically a loss leader. Only if you're Apple, you're doing it on the Apple stores, that kind of stuff, that you make any money off of it. And the MSPs have evolved to be a service-oriented business, because ultimately, if you can't make margin selling hardware, the only place that you're making margin is either a recurring revenue model where you're providing a service that people are more than happy to pay for because they see value in what they're getting, right? And then the other piece is in projects, where you're helping to move them forward. You're doing a strategic project that helps move them, let's say, from an Exchange server on premises to going to Google or Office 365 and the benefits that come with that. So, but all of these are highly technical things. Your everyday business owner isn't going to necessarily know what's the value between moving from Exchange to Office 365. So you have to get really into a lot of the technology, but how it's relevant to a user, how it's relevant to a business, and explaining to them why it's worth paying X number of thousands of dollars to make this sort of fundamental change to the cloud, and et cetera. So I guess, long story short, when we came to the smart home market, we sort of looked at it and said, most of the providers and most of the solutions that we saw in people's homes, which, you go back 6 or 7 years and even sort of 10 years when we were kind of starting to do our research in the market, they're very technology driven. It's all about sort of AV speakers, TVs, projectors at that time, really glitz and glam stuff that's really impressive and looks great, touch screens and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of the systems really didn't work as well as the customers wanted. And
well, you were telling me just before we got started about the MSP customer that pulled you into the home technology space, without naming names. Can you tell the audience that story?
Yeah. I mean, it's basically one of our clients in the MSP space, of a financial firm. One of the executives in that firm, had a very expensive system that had been put in, and it was a Crestron-based system. But this is now going back quite a few years, and spent a huge amount of money, and continued to spend a lot of money, right? And it wasn't the type of engagement that was joyful for them. I mean, in the sense that, like, things would break, they have to have somebody come in, work on these things, fix the stuff, they'd go away, another month goes, things would break, and wash, rinse, repeat. to the degree that, the customer just got sick of, the sort of service people coming in, fixing stuff, and really ultimately not getting to the bottom of the issues, right? And this is kind of where my sort of educational training comes to sort of is I mean, in aerospace, it's all about systems engineering. You're looking, of course, like, is the wing strong enough, or is this particular component in the cockpit doing what it's doing? But ultimately, you have to get 300 people from point A to point B safely, and the only way to do that is look at the entire system. And so we really start to take kind of a different approach, which isn't technology driven, and really looks at the experience that the customer wants to have. And that experience is everything from how they experience the technology, what they're interfacing with, how they're enjoying it, what, does the house start to do things that are somewhat magical to them, right? And then the service component, like, every service engagement needs to be positive. It can't be this sort of like, something's wrong again, something's wrong again. I mean, as soon as you start going down that path, there's no way back.
What was just to dissect that, Michael, a little bit further, what was the mistake and or approach by that integrator, going back to your origin of entering the home technology business, this MSP customer that had a Crestron system that was breaking? What is your diagnosis now, looking in the rearview mirror? What was the mistake? What did that integrator or that company do wrong, or what could they have done differently that might have resulted in a different outcome for that customer?
Well, I think personally, it's very little about what the integrator did back then, and it's more about the solutions that were available at that point.
Okay.
And the amount of time it would take for integrators to learn programming. I mean, this is way before the same tools that are available now, the visual programming tools that we're used to, at least sort of the more modern, systems that are out there. There's a lot of coding and so people are investing huge amounts of time understanding this stuff. And then ultimately, they're sort of believing a lot of what the manufacturers are saying about the capabilities of it. But you don't really have the opportunity. I mean, when you're putting in a $250,000 system in a house, you don't have the opportunity to set that up as a test environment and see what would go wrong with it, right? And I think particularly in the sort of the leading edge of the integration, world, when you go back to the 2000s, that people were putting in systems that were well beyond not just the capabilities of the integrator, but well beyond the capabilities of the systems of that time to really function reliably, right? And for me, it always comes down to this very basic thing, which is, will the smart home ever be dumber than the dumb home, right? And the idea that somebody walks into their house and they can't turn on their lights and they can't turn on their TV and they can't turn on their HVAC system because a single component has failed, right? I mean, that's something that, like, anyone in a dumb house who hasn't spent any money would never have that situation. You'd have a thermostat that broke, or you had a TV that wouldn't work, but you have to have some functionality that works to a certain degree in order for you to say, like, okay, we can make this person's life not only better with this smart home technology that's very cool, but not worse than their neighbor who didn't pay a cent for their technology. So those systems back then ran on single processors. There was very little redundancy. And what redundancy was there was not really built for the types of things that happened out in the market. And ultimately, I think a lot of integrators put in systems that now they're paying for, in the sense that there's a lot of technical debt out there, and they're either having to persuade those customers to redo those systems, reinvest in them, or maybe they've lost them already because that experience wasn't great, even though the integrator is doing great work now with completely different platforms. And this is the the penalty of being in this world, is like, how close to the cutting edge do you want to be?
So in 2000, and correct me if my years are wrong here, I'm looking at my notes. Looks like you entered that, or you had that situation occur in 2011. And
Yeah,
you've
around
around there, and you've since decided to continue to scale up on the integration side. So you're running both an MSP business, B2B, and a technology integration business, which is B2C.
yeah.
And you decided to double down and go grow this business, which your customer had dragged you into. I mean, was that a good decision? Looking at where you're at today, are you happy you did that?
Well,
And why have you stayed doing that? What's good about it for you and your business?
I mean, it come back to me in about a year, and I'll tell you whether or not
Well,
it's a
and I'm
really good
asking that
idea.
because you have a
Right,
unique perspective, right? So you
right.
have this other recurring revenue based commercial customer where you get to justify, as you've said, the return on
Yeah,
investment
yeah,
of a hardware and or a service investment in a company like yours every month, over to here to this consumer business where it's a luxury sale of goods and maybe a larger one-time sale.
right.
But I'm assuming that you're also tying them into service contracts, and so I'd also love to hear you talk about that. But
Yeah, I mean, for us, they are two different businesses in terms of what they're serving, right? B2B versus B2C. And that in itself, I mean, it and I'm sure as you know in your world, it's a very difficult sales and marketing problem, because there's salespeople that work in B2B and there are salespeople that work in B2C. And by the way, those are not the same salespeople. There's marketing tactics that work to B2B and marketing tactics that work B2C. But from a lower down level in terms of how the business operates and sort of the fundamentals of what we do, we really try to keep a lot of consistency between the two sides. So project management, so how we design systems, sort of we're designing something for, a B2B customer. And the overlap between these two worlds, by the way, is AV integration. So conference rooms, remote technology, teleworking technology. I mean, all of that stuff is now huge. I mean, we're doing a theater project for Kayak this month and next. The big travel company, which has a massive planar LED wall, but we're using Savant on the back end, AV over IP, a lot of the same control systems, a lot of the same networking stuff that we'd use in a luxury home. So there's a lot of similar engineering, and what we try to do is really apply a lot of the same operational procedures and kind of the project management into both sides. So they aren't that different in terms of how we manage the projects. Of course, the end result tends to be a little bit more exciting on the smart home side, like walking in and seeing an LG OLED TV on the wall versus like, oh, your computers are still running today. I mean, it's a different
right.
it's a different kind of value proposition, for the end user. But we try to maintain some consistency underneath the hood as much as we can.
What is your opinion around specifically, and I'm just keying in on this concept of service as it relates to the residential integrator, the idea of what is atypical, but it's certainly a conversation that's happening more and more. There are companies that have, been born on this side, of
Right.
the industry that are trying to drive this initiative. You have companies like One Vision there
Mm-hmm.
in Boston. You
Yep.
have, several others that are driving this conversation. What is your opinion? I mean, you're doing this on the residential side. Is this the trend? Is this going to continue to grow? And if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely going to continue to grow, and it has to grow, because ultimately, the way I see it is smart homes are computers in homes, right? And there is certainly the DIY level. I mean, and I mean, that's a huge portion of the market, right? Where you've got people putting in their own systems, maintaining it. They're going to Home Depot, they're ordering on Amazon, and they're sort of putting together their own stuff. I mean, as much as people have predicted that the integrators will be put out of business by that world, I mean, what I've seen time and time again is scale is the problem, right? So if you buy Philips Hues for a 10,000 square foot home, the interface gets completely unmanageable. And that's luckily where integrators step in, right? But, ultimately the integrator has to compete against, solutions which are perceived as being something that you can maintain yourself. And so I would argue that there's two types of customers in the integration world. And one customer tends to be somebody that has a business that runs on computers, right? And understands they don't have to be a technology guru or, somebody that's really fanatical about it, but they understand the basic tenet, which is smart homes at this scale are essentially computers, multiple computers running. And if you want those computers to be functional, to be maintained, to be proactively looked at, and then to be updated as new functions and bug fixes and all that kind of stuff comes out, then you absolutely have to have somebody that's doing that for you. And, if you don't have a customer that has that mindset from day one, that has that understanding, it's always going to be very difficult, to persuade them that they have to spend money on a service component, right? But as people have said, there's lots of recurring revenue models, even in the home, alarm systems and all that kind of stuff. They're out there. It's really about that upfront, figuring out what that value is, expressing it to the customer. One of our keys is that we always put 3 years of service in the project proposal to begin with, right?
Wow.
So somebody is spending 6 figures on home technology, that 3 years of service might be 5 figures, and it's certainly going to add something to the total project. But you bring that discussion up front, and you're also putting it relative to the amount of money they're spending on their system and saying, you want this system to be secure, you want it to have the latest functionality, you want us to be a ongoing partner for you. That's when you want to have that discussion, because they're so favorably inclined towards you, not at the end when you've finished everything, you've just gone through the snag list and all the bugs and you fixed it. Oh, here's a service contract. Like it's never going to work. I mean, it does sometimes, but it's much less likely to work.
No, I agree, and I'm fascinated, Michael, in that you're in the UK. You're in London, or where are you at?
Outside of London, in a place called Canterbury.
All right,
Canterbury,
so you're in Canterbury,
yeah.
And your team is in Boston. And on your website, and I know from talking to you just before going live here, you're doing a number of projects in Iceland, Reykjavik, Iceland.
Yeah, that's
How
right.
are you managing a multi-story, a multi-unit project in Reykjavik with this, the nature of technology and this decentralized team to some extent? I just find that fascinating. And I've got your website live here. So for those listening, I've shared the website. And if you're listening, it is tsp.space. So tsp.space is the integration business. And that's the website that I'm navigating here on Facebook Live.
So, I mean, for us, Iceland came partially from that sort of origin customer. So when he was saying to us we needed to do better than his current system, he was actually talking about a project that an apartment that he was building in Reykjavik, Iceland. And so that sort of started the Icelandic journey, which we did at that point. And actually, we managed that fully from Boston, at the time. But in that process, we met an amazing guy, this guy named Christian, or Chrissy, as we call him in Iceland. And he's an electrician, and those that are listening that are integrators will know that sort of magic unicorn of an electrician who's a licensed electrician, also knows how to punch down low voltage stuff, and also has the brain that can program a Lutron and Savant system, which over the years, obviously, he's gained that knowledge. And we met him, and through the connections in Iceland, both through this contact as well as through working with him, we came upon this project, which is called Osterhofen, in which means Eastern Harbor. And so this project is kind of like the highest end of the luxury space in Reykjavik, which on an American terms, Miami, Boston, New York is sort of middle of the range. I mean, but one of the things that they've really, really tried to emphasize in this project is everything comes smart home ready. They're really trying to differentiate themselves from the rest of the market. And it just so happened that as they were going through the designs of this project the last year or two, that we came upon Lutron and their raw to select system, which is sort of a different class of lighting control in the sense that it's repeatable and it's reliable and it's functional, but then it's also doesn't really require a lot of maintenance, and a lot of programming. I mean, for those that are not familiar with it, it's in-app programming, right? And so we're doing 71 apartments there. We're using the raw to select platform. There's a great product that's available in the EU, which isn't available in the US, which is an inline dimmer. So if you have a bunch of LED ceiling lamps, you can actually put this dimmer. You just slide it in behind the first lamp on the wire, and it's all wireless through Lutron's wireless technology, and you can program it on an iPhone. And so
Why
you
is
go
that
back.
not available in the US?
Well, raw to select as a platform is available in the US, but all of the I don't know if it's regulations around what could get certified or things like that, but it's all switch based. So people are using the Maestro switches on the wall, but in that project it's a lot.
I want to say maybe National Electric Code requires a switch on the wall for a load in the ceiling.
Yeah, there's something like that. Yeah, so you can't have the load in there. So but I mean, in the EU it's very common to do these sort of inline dimmers. So it's I was going back to that Crestron system I was telling you about, years ago, where sort of at scale you have all, there's so much programming and engineering needed. Like the technology has evolved to such a level now, that a developer can essentially look at the cost of that, and this is an analysis we did with them at the very, very beginning of this project. For essentially $10,000 a unit, they can put in something that says we're smart home ready, lighting control, HVAC. We're using Savant thermostats for that, and putting in a Savant host into every unit, even though there's only thermostats there and Lutron, lighting control. Obviously, that's a building block upon which we can add AV and other things without too much cost. So, everything's evolved to the level that, a developer can look at that. It's not insignificant money, certainly. But if you compare it to the cost of the Wolf appliances or the marble countertops or the custom, cabinetry from Italy, that they're using as all these differentiators between, all these luxury apartments that are fighting amongst each other, that cost isn't that big. And it's gotten to the point now that you can sit around with a developer and say, yeah, you know what? It's going to cost you X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's also going to allow you to get that return on investment. And it's going to give you that extra marketing edge that nobody else has in the market. I mean, in this case, in Reykjavik. So,
Michael, believe it or not, we've been talking for 40 minutes.
Oh, goodness.
It feels like it's only been a couple of minutes, which is a sign of a fun interview. Quick question. A lot of those that listen to this show, whether they're watching it live and listening, or they're listening now to the podcast, because all of our shows are now available on podcast. They are oftentimes business owners, business operators. And I always enjoy asking my guests that are the entrepreneurial guests, what are maybe a couple of pieces of advice? You've learned a number of things over your 26 years of running your business. What are some things that come top of mind for you that maybe those that aren't quite where you're at, what are some things they could do or be mindful of that might help them overall improve their business?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. One is not very industry specific and one that is. So one of the things that I've learned in the last X number of years, 5-10 years, is that when I stop learning and I assume I know everything is when I make the biggest mistakes. And so I've really tried to learn more and more about selling, about business, about running a business. I mean, entrepreneurs have this problem of having to be in everything, which basically means you got to read books in it about everything, about finance, about managing your business, about sales, all that kind of stuff. So a couple great books. One is Traction, which I'm sure quite a few entrepreneurs have heard of, but it's a great book, actually set of books now, where it talks about very specific tactical things you can do to manage your business better. I really enjoy that one. And there's another one which is fun for sales called Never Split the Difference, by a guy named Chris Voss, which is an ex FBI negotiator. And he talks about good ways of getting what you want in a way that everybody comes out happy. And it's quite a good read. The other piece of advice that I'll give, which is a little bit more industry specific, in talking about this service side of the business, which I think is this ongoing challenge in the integrator industry, is I mean, I don't have like a magic formula, because I mean, obviously we came from this IT service led, kind of business, but there are, if you want to look ahead by 10 years in the integration business, then get to know somebody in an MSP who runs an MSP, somebody who's either a business owner, VP of sales, or maybe a COO, director of operations. You'll see the types of tools that are available to doing IT, and of course, like, you may not necessarily understand the minute technical details, but you'll see the level of maturity that these tools are out there to manage systems, which are arguably much more complex than the smart home systems that we have to deal with, and how they do it. And this is where the industry is going to go. And so if you can gain any insight from spending time with somebody who runs an MSP, how they price things out, how they express value to their customers, how they operationalize, things very differently than integrators. It's hopefully there's something there.
What would be resources on that front? It's super interesting. Are there trade associations or conferences or books that you're aware of around this?
Luckily, the MSP market, because it's so, I mean, everybody has a company that takes care of their IT, or they do it internally, but every business out there has a solution, and a lot of them involve MSPs. So I would go, all of the natural business networking stuff, that you go to. I mean, it can be from Chamber of Commerce or the Young Entrepreneurs or any of those types of places. There's gonna be somebody that's in this sort of networking computer MSP world, and just hunt for that term. If you run into somebody that's doing IT, ask them if they run an MSP or they know somebody who does. We're a dime a dozen. It's a highly competitive market, but that's what's going to happen in the integrator market.
Why do you say that so confidently? Explain yourself. The integration market is going to go the direction of MSPs.
Well, first off, I mean, the trend is towards software, towards configurability, right? It's not about hardware anymore, not about big speakers, not about TVs, big expensive TVs, even though we're perfectly successful in selling a lot of that stuff. We had a meeting with a client that basically said, okay, we're unplugging, from cable. We don't really like this idea of video matrices, of distributed video, distributed audio is sort of being replaced by Sonos. Everything's being driven into software configuration, all that kind of stuff. And so this world, and I'm sure there's some integrators out there listening or watching that'll be like, yeah, this is the world where all my hardware sales are going slowly down 2 or 3% every year. But you have to be putting something back up on top of that. And that's all about, services, software configuration, and being able to express to your end clients how those types of things are valuable. And that's something that the MSPs, have been very, very good. I mean, we sell kind of the boring stuff, which is like keeping your stuff running, moving stuff to Google, moving stuff to Office 365. But and there are some extremely profitable MSPs out there, we're still trying to work our way up the ladder. But, it's the kind of thing where you can see that people that were ahead of the game 10 years ago, they understood that there was a sea change coming. Hardware margins were not really what was going to drive the business anymore. They found ways to sort of create new markets for themselves by sort of saying, like, and it's a lot of time in front of the customers, understanding what they want, what they need, how they want it delivered. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of integrators that are out there that have that opportunity in their marketplace to start those conversations where other people haven't.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. Michael, where can our audience go to learn more about you and or to subscribe to your podcast?
Well, so our podcast is Grabcast. My website is tsp.me for the MSP side and tsp.space for the home automation and AV integration space. I'm also on Twitter at Hobbsoh, HOBBESOH. And we're on Instagram. The company's on Instagram at TSP LLC. And of course, LinkedIn, all the usual places.
Tell me if I got this right. I did Twitter, Hobbsoh.
HOBBESOH.
HOBB. I'm trying to be helpful here as my guest is described. There we go. Did I get that right?
Well, it's an OH at the end instead of HO.
Oh, goodness. OH. I'm doing terrible, folks. I'm trying to be helpful. There we go.
You can fix it in post. There you go.
There we go.
Awesome.
HOBBESOH.
That's right.
On
so that's my personal Twitter, and but the Instagram should have a little bit of our work on it. And and I'm sure some of your some of the people listening may be like, okay, well, when you're a $10 or $15 million integrator, I'm sure that some of these lessons may not be, so applicable. And I'll say that, just to sort of say, look, we're pretty small, right? And we have the opportunity to choose our clients. And I know some of the large integrators to a certain degree don't. I mean, while it seems like you should be able to, well, you have architects that are feeding you business. You have builders that are feeding you business. You have to take everything, regardless of whether or not the customer is aligned with this service-led idea. So, I mean, as we grow, we may run into a lot of these same challenges. But I think that's one of the things about kind of being the new upstart, is to be able to say, you know what, we can choose the right clients and hopefully find the ones that really understand where we're coming from in terms of delivering service on top of the technology.
Love it. Michael, thank you, sir, for being my guest on show 92 of Automation Unplugged.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right. There you go, folks. Michael from TSP.me and TSP.space. Tech Superpowers. What a cool name. He was telling me just prior to going live, he's like, what else is an 18-year-old that's just a freshman in college and the internet is brand new? What else are you going to call your business? And I think it's a pretty awesome name. Well, again, today is Monday, December 2nd. It's actually just approaching 1:30, so I'm going to sign off. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you didn't see the last show, then I'll wish you a belated happy Thanksgiving. And I will see you next time on the next episode of Automation Unplugged. Thanks, guys.